Oh, Mr. Kentley, so glad you could come.
Thank you, Brandon. Mrs. Kentley isn't well, so I took the liberty of bringing my sister-in-law, Mrs. Atwater. She's been staying with us.
Oh, delighted to have you, Mrs. Atwater.
Delighted to come, dear boy.
What was curious to me was Rope is supposedly American and has 2 English in it. And I think a brilliant performance in the picture is given by Cedric Hardwicke, who's English.
Constance Collier, she was a marvelous, marvelous actress. And she had a lady with her secretary, which I called her nanny, named Phyllis, and she'd be always calling Phyllis, 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 she'd be yelling all the time. So we all started yelling, Phyllis, Phyllis. But she and Sir Cedric were really the peppy ones on the set. They had a great time together. They just laughed and carried on and, enjoyed themselves.
Do you know, I think I like Mason as much as Errol Flynn.
I'll take Cary Grant myself.
Oh, so will I. Capricorn, the goat, he leaps divine. So much,
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, he was thrilling in that new thing with Bergman. What is it called now? The something of the something. No, that was the other one. This was just plain something.
I really don't remember whether she was referring to Notorious or anything with that dialogue about going to the movies. I just wanted that character to be vague and not be able to remember much of anything.
I must say I've had a perfectly dreadful time getting tickets for that new musical. What's it called? You know.
The something with what's her name?
Actually, Constance Collier had written a play with Ivan Novello, who was a very close friend of my parents, which my father then made into a movie called Downhill, which was a big flop.
How's Mrs. Kentley?
As usual, it's a cold this time. I hope David arrives soon. She wants him to call her.
David's her only child, Mr. Kentley.
Well, he's my only child, too, but I'm willing to let him grow up.
I try to put things in like with the mother of the dead boy, not have her, but have him be a mother's boy.
She's frantic.
I better talk to her.
She hung up. She began to cry so badly. Oh, Henry, I'm worried.
We were spared seeing her because that gets really tiresome. I try to make a character for this dead boy whom you supposedly never saw. Of course, Hitch crossed me up because he shot the scene of the actual murder and inserted it into the picture. I think he did it because he had a failure of nerve. I thought the suspense would be, is there or is there not a body in that chest? Well, here he eliminated that. Once you see it, you know they're murderers and you know they're going to get caught. And I think it took a lot of the tension out of the picture. At least it did for me.
My father had always wanted to photograph a stage play, but he was never quite sure whether it would be a success or not, so he never did it until he started his own company, Transatlantic Pictures, with Sidney Bernstein, who he had done pictures for the Free French during the war. When my father decided he wanted to make Rope, he would only do it in the way as one continuous thing, which is the way you would watch a stage play.
Right from the beginning, he told me he was going to do it as a play, and with, I think, 9 takes for 9 reels, something like that. And that interested him because it hadn't been done. It seemed to me to be a gimmick, but who was I? He was the great Hitchcock. And when you see the film, what bothers me is he has to close in on someone's back, reload the camera, and then pull back again from the back. So you see really what he's trying to hide.
The attraction to me, of course, was Alfred Hitchcock and the way it was going to be shot, because it was going to be shot a reel at a time. And it was supposed to be a film that had no editing, which of course he couldn't really do because there's only 10 minutes in the reel of film that is used. So we had to shoot 10 minutes at a time. And he wanted this sort of flow to go on. And it was just a very sort of interesting experiment to do.
Oh, they're here. Are we ready?
As ready as we'll ever be.
Well, now, mind you, don't you be so busy at that piano that you don't eat anything, getting too thin. And don't you let them gobble up all that patty before you have any. Let's hope it's a success. Oh, my tray.
Take it in the kitchen, Mrs. Wilson. I'll answer the door.
There wouldn't be this last-minute hustle-bustle if you kept my table and let those roll.
Now the fun begins.
Hitch loved to show everybody the set, and we had practically everybody in Hollywood visiting, and Hitch loved showing it off.
What was impressive about the set was how difficult it all was to shoot anything. You didn't get any idea that this was a startlingly attractive set or unattractive set, but it was like seeing this giant erector set that this kid was moving around and getting his jollies from. It was amazing, the timing. The stagehands were terribly important in that picture.
It was all laid out ahead of time, which he always did with all the drawings. And it was difficult because the walls were on rollers and the furniture had to move all the time. And we would rehearse for a day and then shoot the next day. And many times the lighting didn't work right, so we'd have to reshoot. And it was hard on the actors.
He was famous for calling actors, I don't know, sheep or something. And I remember he had a press conference on the set of Rope. And he was a star, which most directors weren't. He was the star of his pictures. So the press from all over the world was there, and he was expounding on how much he rehearsed. And Jimmy Stewart said, the only damn thing that's been rehearsed around here is the camera, which was true. He had a curious way of directing. He would say, smile, and then you had to stop smiling. That was directing actors. But he got what he wanted.
You going to play? How lovely.
Your wife sends her love.
David wasn't there?
No, he'll probably be here in a minute, though.
It was a Poulenc piece, and I had to learn it as best I could. It was recorded, of course, but I had to really sort of do the fingering.
I knew the music, and it also had a strange quality I thought was right for the picture. He practiced it like mad, Farley. Couldn't really play it, but at least the fingers looked right. I'm always intrigued with that in the screen. You see them playing up a storm and you begin to believe it.
You're very fond of that little tune, aren't you? You know, Philip, I wish I could come straight out with what I want to know. Unfortunately, I don't know anything. I merely suspect.
He was, he was Jimmy Stewart, and I had a feeling he was a bit unsure about the part, because in a sense, he is as much a heavy as the boys are, because he was their teacher, and he never really played that kind of part before. So I don't know how he felt. I think he felt a bit uncomfortable, really. Someone like James Mason would be more acceptable, really, than Stewart. I think that's maybe one of the reasons that it wasn't such a big hit. They didn't like Stewart in that kind of part.
It was very hard for the actors to play, for example, an intimate scene with their feet crossing over each other as they climbed over cables to accommodate the camera. Everything was to accommodate the camera. And Hitch was terribly nervous about it. It was very hard to do. It was a gigantic trick, and that's what interested him.
The color cameras were enormous. It was like this great big thing moving around this room, and we all had to get out of its way. Chairs were being pulled out and everything, or pulled under you, so you could sit down and hope that the chair would be there.
There, that's much better.
You saw through the window the skyline, and it had to get darker as the party progressed. And this was Hitch's first picture in blazing Technicolor. The set was very subdued, and the costumes were all very quieted. He was careful about that. And you saw it on the screen. It was like a Mexican fiesta in Olivera Street. It's because the printing process was quite primitive then. And that was the first time I ever saw him get really angry. And they had to reshoot and reprint. It was awful.
The crews loved him because he knew everything technically. Years and years and years before, when he was very young, he worked in Munich, in UFA, the German studios, and he was a set designer then, and he did all kinds of jobs. So he knew what lenses should be on the camera and where everything should be and the lights and everything. And the crews loved him because he knew. And not many directors did, may I say, not many at all.
Hitchcock is in every one of his pictures. Very important cameo because everybody's looking for him. And the question was, how was he going to get himself into a picture that takes place in one room? So the original idea, which was his, he was going to have a neon drawing of his profile on a sign outside the room, which he did, and then I suppose he decided it was too obvious or too jokey. So under the titles you see him walking along the street where the boys have their apartment.
What the devil are you doing?
Making our work of art a masterpiece.
Brandon, you're going too far.
Why? What do you mean? I just thought it'd be nice to have supper in here. On this.
He was interested in adding ghoulish touches, or what he hoped would be. For example, he wanted a bottle of wine to get knocked over on this buffet